As a feature, we had the ability to transfer money or securities or anything simply by entering a unique identifier. Entering unique identifier, entering unique identifier, entering unique identifier, unique identifier, unique identifier, unique
Extremely dangerous questions, because with our present knowledge we have no idea what would happen. Even now, man may be unwittingly changing the world's climate through the waste products of his civilization. Due to our release through factories and automobiles every year of more than 6 billion tons of carbon dioxide, which helps air absorb heat from the sun, our atmosphere seems to be getting warmer.
This is bad?
Well, it's been calculated a few degrees rise in the Earth's temperature would melt the polar ice caps. And if this happens, an inland sea would fill a good portion of the Mississippi Valley. Tourists in glass-bottomed boats would be viewing the drowned towers of Miami through 150 feet of tropical water. For in weather, we're not only dealing with forces of a far greater variety than even the atomic physicist encounters, but with life itself.
And so if you have half the resources of the counterparty, then you better be real innovative. If you're not innovative, you're going to lose.
I'm not sure whether that's a cyber attack that's ongoing or not here, so. The clock says I have 11 minutes left. Is that not true?
Let's get some smooth.
All right, so smooth jazz, Elon.
Smooth jazz.
It's coming through the House system. We're working to get it shut off.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, well, anyway. So yeah, with respect to China, China's economy is going to be 2 to 3 times the size of the U.S. economy, at least double. So therefore, in order for the U.S. to be competitive on a military level, the innovation has to overcome a gigantic gap in economic output. Okay. So in the absence of radical innovation, the U.S. will be militarily second. Okay. Basic. We currently operate on 2 layers. We have sort of a limbic, like prime primitive brain layer, which is where all of our kind of impulses are coming from. It's sort of like we've got like a monkey brain with a computer stuck on it. That's the human brain. And a lot of our impulses and everything are driven by the monkey brain. And the computer, the cortex, is constantly trying to make the monkey brain happy. It's not the cortex that's steering the monkey brain. It's the monkey brain steering the cortex. You know.
But the cortex is the part that tells the story of the whole thing. So we convince ourselves it's more interesting than just the monkey brain.
The cortex is like what we call like human intelligence. You know, so it's like that's like the advanced computer relative to other creatures. Other creatures do not have really. They don't have the computer, or they have a very weak computer relative to humans. But it's like it sort of seems like surely the really smart thing should control the dumb thing, but actually the dumb thing controls the smart thing.
Boundary. Now, what I'm saying is that it's very like that. The infinity that we might experience like those angels and devils in their world can be thought of as a boundary. Now, I found this a very useful way of talking about radiation, gravitational radiation, and things like that. It was a trick, mathematical trick. So now what I'm saying is that mathematical trick becomes real. That somehow the photons, they need to go somewhere. Because from their perspective, infinity is just another place. Now, this is a difficult idea to get your mind around. So
Yes.
that's why one of the reasons cosmologists are finding a lot of trouble taking me seriously. But to me, it's not such a wild idea. What's on the other side of that infinity? You have to think, why am I allowed to think of this? Because photons don't have any mass. And we in physics have beautiful ways of measuring time. There are incredibly precise clocks, atomic and nuclear clocks, unbelievably precise. Why are they so precise? Because of the two most famous equations of 20th century physics. One of them is Einstein's E equals mc squared. What's that tell us? Energy and mass are equivalent. The other one is even older than that, still 20th century, only just. Max Planck, E equals h nu. Nu is a frequency, h is a constant again like c, E is energy. Energy and frequency are equivalent. Put the two together, energy and mass are equivalent, Einstein, energy and frequency are equivalent, Max Planck. Put the two together, mass and frequency are equivalent. Absolutely basic physical principle. If you have a massive entity, a massive particle, it is a clock with a very, very precise frequency. They lose the mass too. So for a completely opposite reason, they lose the sense of scale as well. So my crazy idea is the Big Bang and the remote future, they seem completely different. One is extremely dense, extremely hot. The other is very, very rarefied and very, very cold. But if you squash one down by this conformal scaling, you get the other. So although they look and feel very different, they're really almost the same. The remote future, on the other side, I'm claiming is that, where do the photons go? They go into the next Big Bang. You've got to get your mind around that crazy idea.
Taking a step on the other side of the place that is infinity. Okay,
Yes.
but
So I'm saying the other side of our Big Bang, now I'm going back into the Big Bang. There
backwards.
was the remote future of a previous eon.
Previous eon.
And what I'm saying is that previous eon, there are signals coming through to us which we can see and which we do see. And these are both signals, the two main signals are to do with black holes. One of them is the collisions between black holes, and as they spiral into each other, they release a lot of energy in the form of gravitational waves. Those gravitational waves get through in a certain form into the next eon.
That's fascinating that there's some, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that means that some information can travel
Yes,
from another eon.
exactly.
That is fascinating. I've seen somewhere described sort of the discussion of the Fermi paradox. That if there's intelligent life,
Yes.
Communication immediately takes you there. So
We have
do
a
you think-
paper. I have my colleague Vahir Gurzajan, who I worked with on these ideas for a while. We have a crazy paper on that. Yes.
So
Looking at the Fermi paradox. Yes.
right. So if the universe is just cycling over and over and over, punctuated by
Yep.
punctuated the singularity of the Big Bang,
Yes.
and then
Is that previous eon, there are signals coming through to us which we can see and which we do see. And these are both signals, the two main signals are to do with black holes. One of them is the collisions between black holes, and as they spiral into each other, they release a lot of energy in the form of gravitational waves. Those gravitational waves get through in a certain form into the next eon.
that's fascinating that there's some. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that means that some information can travel
Yes,
from another eon.
exactly.
That is fascinating. I've seen somewhere described sort of the discussion of the Fermi paradox. That if there's intelligent life,
Yes.
Being, communication immediately takes you there. So
We have
do
a
you think-
paper. I have my colleague Vahe Gurzajan, who I worked with this, on these ideas for a while. We have a crazy paper on that. Yes.
So
Looking at the Fermi paradox. Yes.
right. So if the universe is just cycling over and over and over, punctuated by
Yep.
punctuated the singularity of the Big Bang,
Yes.
and then intelligent or any kind of intelligent systems can communicate through from eon to eon. Why haven't we heard anything from our alien friends?
Because we don't know how to look.
Situation that we're in. We've seen gold go up. It's gone up more than stocks, for example. And if there continues to be high levels of inflation, gold will continue to benefit there as well. I just personally think that Bitcoin will benefit more than gold. So it's not, to me, a binary thing, gold versus Bitcoin. It's just that Bitcoin is going to outperform gold, but gold will still do well. So Peter and I are absolutely fine. We talk, every once in a while, and I tend to think that he's a good dude. And look, he likes to troll people on the internet. Fine, whatever. Have a blast. He's having fun, and people troll him back. So he's kind of engaging, and you guys are just doing what he wants you to do. Now, one thing on inflation that I will say that I don't know if a lot of people saw, Marty Bent wrote about this week that I thought was really interesting, is if I remember correctly, I think it was the St. Louis Fed chair. It may have been Boston. I can't remember. But somebody at one of the Federal Reserve said that they're not worried about inflation. They actually think that we should hit the 2% inflation and potentially overshoot our 2% inflation target before we start worrying about inflation. Rewind that. Hear what I just said. They were talking about inflation, and because we were printing trillions of dollars, they were essentially asked, are you worried about inflation? Jay Powell said, I'm not worried about inflation. We'll worry about that down the road. This person said, we shouldn't worry about it. We should at least hit our 2% inflation target and potentially overshoot it. When I hear inflation, what I hear is we are going to steal the wealth of the bottom 50% of Americans. That's what is occurring. And we can talk about how it pumps asset prices and does all this stuff, and it's supposed to spur economic activity. All that other stuff is fine. But when I hear that we're going to overshoot 2% inflation, that's the CPI metric. Remember, coming out of 2008, 2009 crisis, we never saw the high 3-4% inflation that everyone thought we were going to see in the CPI metrics. But if you go and you actually look at inflation, you say, wait a second, everyone's inflation level that they experience is not the same. So one person may be experiencing 1.5% inflation. Another socioeconomic class may be experiencing 6% inflation. There's a number of studies that have come out of both the United States and Europe that show that actually some people coming out of 2008, 2009 crisis had 6 to 10% inflation. But that's not what the narrative is. The CPI metric doesn't say that. But again, if you don't have all of your wealth in cash and you're not living paycheck to paycheck and you have an inflation adjusted wage contract, of course, the inflation that you experience is going to be much lower than the person who isn't protected by an inflation adjusted wage contract, doesn't have any assets, and is living paycheck to paycheck with 100% of their wealth in cash. So when I hear that they want to overshoot the 2% inflation target, one, that means that they are actually going to be aggressive enough to hit it this time, or they want to be. So we're going to have more stimulus on the way. We're going to continue to devalue the dollar. And that means that the people at the lowest end of the socioeconomic ladder, they're going to experience double-digit inflation. Double-digit inflation. What is the difference between us and Lebanon, us and Venezuela? We may not hit true hyperinflation, but if you're living in a world where you experience 10% or more inflation, and you literally feel like you can't get ahead, and you're getting paid in cash, and you're watching your wealth be devalued, what's the difference? There's not that much difference. In Lebanon right now, 85% loss in the value of the currency against the dollar. And then when people see that their currency is being devalued, most people don't understand economics. They don't understand how money works. They don't understand what's going on. All they know is that price of bread just doubled overnight or in a week or 2 weeks. Why is the bread twice as expensive as it was yesterday? Well, it's because my currency buys less of it. And so what do they say? Well, get me out of the currency. No brainer. But they go to the bank, and the bank says, hey, you can't withdraw more than X dollars or X of your local currency. There's a capital control. You can only take out so much. And by the way, you have to pull it out in our currency. You can't pull it out in US dollars or any other foreign currency. You have to pull it. You're locked into our currency. So what it does is it creates this massive black market, Bitcoin selling at 2x the value of Bitcoin elsewhere, right? Or people wanting to get dollars and all this kind of stuff. And so what you see is that the currency drives social unrest. They literally were lighting banks on fire in Lebanon. Why? Because they were trapped in a currency, and the people at the lowest end of the socioeconomic ladder got hurt the worst. Now, that's an 85% drop in value of the currency. I don't think we're going to see that in the US dollar, but I do think we're going to see high levels of inflation for the lowest socioeconomic classes. I do think it will lead to social unrest at some point. And I do believe that we are going to see an ever widening inequality gap that is going to go on steroids. If you look back since 1971, it basically looks like this, right? It's like 45-degree angles to the up and 45-degree angles down for the poor. So rich get richer, poor get poorer. I do believe that we are going to see that massively increase. You cannot print trillions of dollars and not expect an impact on the back end. It's just not possible. So we'll see what happens there. Could you please comment on the merits of printing money? How will this work with cryptocurrency? Yeah. So for those that have never heard this, I'll take 2 seconds on why I am so bullish on Bitcoin, right? I believe there's two financial systems. There's the legacy financial system. It's inflationary. The core unit of account or the global reserve currency is the US dollar. I think there's a second alternative financial system. Basically, think of this as the internet economy, right? That is a digital, decentralized financial system. The core unit of account there is Bitcoin. If you look at what is going to occur in the legacy world, every single currency in the world is going to get digitized. We will have a digital dollar. We will have a digital euro, a digital yuan, a digital yen, right? We will have private currencies. So you'll see things like Libra and other companies launching these private digital currencies. And then you have something like Bitcoin. And so when you get in a world where every single currency is digitized, now what you do is you get a competition at the monetary policy level. Because if you're in Lebanon or Venezuela or Zimbabwe or in other places in the world, when you get locked in capital controls and people say, hey, you can't get out of your local currency, you then go and you look for dollars. But the black market is dangerous, right? In terms of one, you can get ripped off, and two, it's actually violent. Two is if you end up getting dollars and you put in your bank account, the bank could seize that money or your government could seize that money. And three is you could go into things like gold, for example, but it's super hard, right? It's not portable, it's not divisible, it's hard to buy things with, all that kind of stuff. And so what ends up happening now is you say, well, what money can I get on the internet? I have an internet connection. This is 2020. Like, how do I get my wealth out of my local currency into something else? And so if every currency is digitized, I now can buy just with an internet connection. I can buy dollars, I can buy yuan, I can buy euros, I can buy all this stuff. So you get every single currency is now accessible to me, right? That's in a steady state when everything's digitized. As we move towards that world, if only the digital yuan or the digital yen is available, or digital RMB, euro, whatever, and the US dollar is not digitized, then actually people have better access to other foreign currencies than the US dollar. Would be a huge problem for the US. So I think we should run and get a digital dollar as soon as possible. But once everything's digitized, you then have a competition not at the technology layer. You have a competition at the monetary policy layer. And I believe that both individuals and governments are going to believe that every single currency is being manipulated in the world. The US dollar, all the way down the right, euro, RMB, everything. So when you believe that everything is being digitized or is being manipulated, you say, well, which one's not being manipulated? Oh, there's this currency that has a monetary policy that's programmatic, transparent, and it is completely out of the control of anybody else. It's a fully decentralized system. I trust that system because I at least know what's going on and I know I'm not getting screwed. If you look at countries, if all of a sudden Russia and China said, hey, we want to start to transact in another currency, but what they see is, wait, Russia's manipulating their currency, China's manipulating their currency. We don't want to use the dollar because it's an expensive, tough system for us to use. Instead, what they're going to start to say at some point, we will see countries say, well, why don't we use this other currency that's decentralized, that's transparent, that's programmable, that nobody owns? We know nobody's manipulating that one. Let's settle our transaction in a currency where no one has manipulation powers. And so I think that it is an inevitability that Bitcoin will rise to become the global reserve currency. Individuals and governments will see that. It is complete game theory. The second that one country says we're going to put it in our reserves, in our national reserves, or says we're going to adopt it, there will be a global FOMO, and every country will rush in because there's only 21 million Bitcoin. That scarcity will drive immense value. I think that everyone is actually drastically underestimating the potential of Bitcoin. It is a market expanding technology, meaning that most people compare to, can it capture the gold market? Can it capture the global monetary supply market? Gold's $7-8 trillion. Global monetary supply is $80-90 trillion. I actually think Bitcoin can capture upwards of 120, 130, 150, maybe even $200 trillion of total addressable market. How do they do that? Most people are incentivized to get out of their local currency, like we talked about with inflation, get into stocks, real estate, art, gold, Bitcoin, whatever. So they get out of their currency into these store of value assets. If all of a sudden you have a currency, though, that is a store of value, right? It doesn't devalue over time. It actually increases in value over time because it is a artificially capped supply. You're going to steal market share back from those assets into the monetary supply. And so I think that you could see something like a doubling of the global monetary supply with Bitcoin capturing majority of the market over a long period of time. Again, could take 20, 30 years. I just think that's the inevitability that we're going to see. So we'll see what happens there. Let's see here. All right, I'm gonna hang out for 10 more minutes. So get me all your questions, and I will answer as many of them as I can. Before I forget, if you want to hear more of this, please go and sign up. I write a letter every single morning to 50,000, literally over 50,000 people read this every single day. Please, I just put it in the chat. Go sign up, and you'll get kind of my thoughts on all this stuff every single day. Remember to like the video. Please subscribe to the channel. All that stuff. COVID. Yeah. So look, I think that one of the things on COVID that's really important here is it's serious, right? We are seeing an explosion. Now, one of the things that I've continued to say from day one is there is a complete lack of math and science in this country. Like, there is absolute absurdity going on. I have heard of things like if people die but tested positive for COVID, they count as a COVID death. Right? I literally know it's somebody I know, a family member of theirs died from cancer, and they had tested positive for COVID. And when they looked at the paper, it said COVID death. And the whole family was like, "What do you mean it's a COVID death? Like, they obviously died from cancer. Like, we know like they've been suffering from cancer this entire time." But the hospital has a financial incentive to mark it as a COVID death. So there is a complete kind of manipulation of numbers going on one side. On the other side, right? So that was kind of the anti-COVID numbers argument. The pro-COVID number argument is that there is a rise in many places. So New York City, for example, there's a rise in the number of deaths that are uncategorized. And so there's a lot of people saying, well, what else could that be? People aren't getting car accidents, all this kind of stuff, right? So my point is not, are the numbers undercounting or overcounting? My point is that we don't know. And I'll take it to this. So I saw yesterday a report that said the CDC is now reporting record numbers of COVID cases, right? Everyone's freaking out. But then it said, actually, one of the things that is happening is that some of the states are counting, they're double counting. If you test positive through the traditional test, and then you get an antibody test and you test positive, that counts as 2 COVID cases. So they're double counting people. In other situations, they're counting the antibody test as a positive case. But just because you have the antibodies doesn't mean that you actually have a hospitalization or you're showing symptoms or anything like that. And so, again, there's a lack of math and science. There's a lack of intellectual rigor. Right? I have yet to see mainstream media question the numbers. Complete lack of intellectual rigor going on and looking at this. We're just taking the numbers that we're being given and we're saying, sure, they're okay. You can't do that because we can't make good decisions with bad data. So I think that we have to get a kind of reckoning there. Again, I don't know what the numbers are, right? I don't know if we're overcounting or undercounting. What I do know is wear your damn mask. It's not that hard. I love what the Georgia governor is doing. The Georgia governor said, right, this is like the epitome of threading the needle in terms of COVID. The Atlanta mayor got COVID and started to mandate, like she personally got COVID. She began to legally mandate, you had to wear a mask. And the governor sued her. So the mayor is a Democrat, the governor is Republican. The governor sued the mayor of Atlanta and said, you cannot force people to wear a mask. You cannot legally mandate it, right? You are violating their constitutional rights. So he sued the mayor to stop it. But then he went on television and urged people to wear masks. So what I took away from that is he's not anti-mask. He's pro-mask, pro-constitution. He's saying we can't legally require people to do this, but we can strongly urge people, we can educate them, we can get them understanding what the impact of that is, etc. Again, is that the right answer? I don't know. But I do think that that's a very nuanced way to look at this, where you can be pro-Constitution and pro-masks, pro-science. Again, are there better solutions? Sure. There's all kinds of things that we can be doing. But I think that we've gotten into a world where there's the mob comes after people, right? The mainstream media. Like many people may have seen Bari Weiss. She quit the New York Times. Andrew Sullivan just quit New York Mag and Vox Media. And what they're basically saying is like, look, I can no longer say the things that I believe because the mob comes after me. And I was reading Andrew Sullivan. For those of you that haven't read it, I highly suggest going and reading his piece. He basically said, see you Friday, I think, or something. If you just type in Andrew Sullivan, see you Friday, you'll find his piece. And he said, look, in my newsroom, everyone hates me and they feel uncomfortable around me because of my conservative views. And he put it in air, like, you know, I'm putting in air quotes. But he said, my conservative views are, I didn't want Trump as president. I came out as openly gay. I fought for, you know, all of these social things. He's basically saying, look, like, I'm a Democrat. But he's like, but it's gotten to the point where I'm considered a threat because I violate the narrative, because I'm willing to talk about things that I don't even necessarily agree. I'm willing to have kind of intellectual rigor and independent thought. And so I think that that is one of the things that we've got to get back to in this country, is we've got to start to seek truth over consensus. Who cares what the consensus is? Just because it's the consensus does not mean it's right. We have to find truth. That COVID cases, true. We got to find the truth. What is the number? How many people are dying? We got to have good data to make good decisions. In the economic world, we have to find truth. What is the economic reality on the ground? Who cares what the consensus is? What is the truth? In the social issues, what is the truth? Who cares what the consensus is? The truth has to reign supreme in our society, because the day you give up truth and you start to kind of optimize for consensus is the day that we lose our way. And so that is true across all, you know, walks of life, and even in your personal life. And so I think that's the biggest thing right now that I'm paying attention to, is where are the independent thinkers? And again, the independent thinkers isn't this like weird world of, oh, independent thinkers don't believe in coronavirus or masks. Actually, most of the independent thinkers believe in masks, right? If you look at most people in Silicon Valley who are kind of think from first principles and have independent thought and are, you know, kind of constantly contrarian, they were some of the first people saying, hey, COVID's real. This is serious. We should go into lockdown, and kind of got made fun of for it. So I think that, again, we have to just get into this world where we seek truth over consensus. I think the economic situation that we're facing today is much, much worse than people are realizing. We're kind of, there's this mirage of the stock prices are going up. Everyone's making money in the top 50% of Americans, while the bottom 50% of Americans are getting absolutely ravaged. And I think that there's going to be a reckoning in terms of either we're going to have tons more stimulus in order to continue to kind of bridge us to an economic recovery, or you're going to see the stimulus expire and you're going to have to see a market correction in order to kind of meet economic reality. But we must seek truth over consensus. It is absolutely essential. All right. That's it. The CEO departures kind of at the top, all of these things. What's your take at this point in time, right? So we're kind of going into this situation. We're not out of it, but like, how do you view a lot of that behavior right now?
So I got an email this morning actually from my prime broker. So hedge funds were at 99 to 100th percentile of their historical max leverage, literally February 20th. And now we're at, you know, the 20th to 30th percentile historically. So, you know, we were probably at 7 or 8 turns of leverage, and now we're probably down to 1.5 to 2 or 3. I think that this next go around, you're going to have to realize, government will have to realize that in 2008, all they did was allow financial institutions to pass the buck. They were able to take the leverage off balance sheet. And when you subtract out debt as a function of GDP, for many years now, we have had negative GDP. So we were not growing in the absence of people issuing debt. And most of that debt, unfortunately, was not towards R&D. but it was towards things that superficially propped up stock prices, which really only benefited a handful of people. And I do think we have to restrain people from being able to do that in the future. I don't think it makes a lot of sense, and I don't think it adds a lot of value. And I think that it's not that it was obviously responsible for the coronavirus, but I do think that when you look at how much devastation we are encountering, and when we do the final tally on the amount of the amount of bailouts we need, the bailouts are directly correlated to how stupidly run and badly run these companies were. Why is it that California is legally mandated, and you'll say, oh, because it's a nonprofit, but legally mandated to have a rainy day fund, but a company isn't? And then the company is the first one to knock on the door of the government, and we're just waiting for the next shoe to drop where California, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana to all do the same thing. And I would much rather see the money go to the states and the cities in a fair, even way than the money go to a private company. I think that those private companies should be wiped out, the equity should be wiped out, and they should need to restart.
The CEO departures kind of at the top, all of these things. What's your take at this point in time, right? So we're kind of going into this situation. We're not out of it, but like, how do you view a lot of that behavior right now?
So I got an email this morning actually from my prime broker. So hedge funds were at 99 to 100th percentile of their historical max leverage, literally February 20th. And now we're at the 20th to 30th percentile historically. So, we were probably at 7 or 8 turns of leverage, and now we're probably down to 1.5 to 2 or 3. I think that this next go around, you're going to have to realize, government will have to realize that in 2008, all they did was allow financial institutions to pass the buck. They were able to take the leverage off balance sheet. And when you subtract out debt as a function of GDP, for many years now, we have had negative GDP. So we were not growing in the absence of people issuing debt. And most of that debt, unfortunately, was not towards R&D, but it was towards things that superficially propped up stock prices, which really only benefited a handful of people. And I do think we have to restrain people from being able to do that in the future. I don't think it makes a lot of sense, and I don't think it adds a lot of value. And I think that it's not that it was obviously responsible for the coronavirus, but I do think that when you look at how much devastation we are encountering, and when we do the final tally on the amount of the amount of bailouts we need, the bailouts are directly correlated to how stupidly run and badly run these companies were. Why is it that California is legally mandated, and you'll say, oh, because it's a nonprofit, but legally mandated to have a rainy day fund, but a company isn't? And then the company is the first one to knock on the door of the government, and we're just waiting for the next shoe to drop where California, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana to all do the same thing. And I would much rather see the money go to the states and the cities in a fair, even way than the money go to a private company. I think that those private companies should be wiped out, the equity should be wiped out, and they should need to restart.
It's one thing, so I'm 100% in alignment with you on this, but the part that I don't understand is, how do you continue to benefit from the elements of capitalism if you take out the risk moving forward? If everyone knows I can, quote unquote, take this like fake risk, and if anything goes wrong, I can just run to the government and get a bailout, you change the dynamic of what happens. And I actually think you incentivize even more bad behavior, right? It's almost like there was bad behavior and then there was no punishment for it. And therefore you just encourage that to continue, when we get out of this thing.
Well, it depends on what you view capitalism as. I think if you view capitalism as a game of risk, I think you're right. I've always viewed capitalism as money becomes the fulcrum instrument for change. What do you want to see in the world? Mm-hmm. Okay, money's your lubricant, you decide. And the person with more money, or the person who's willing to put more money into something and who can be more clever, basically has the opportunity to win. So I think it's a game that puts ingenuity and money at the forefront. To me, that's what capitalism is. And so when companies are doing things that are fundamentally not advancing that forward, they should disqualify themselves from them being able to run to the government. So it would be a different thing entirely if all the airlines had invested, let's just say 96% of free cash flow dollars on supersonic flight, failed, and then came to the government and said, look, I took a big bet on the future to help advance humanity. It didn't work, and I need a bailout. I would be the first one to say, okay. But when 96% of free cash flow dollars go back to buying back shares, and then you basically claim the same thing, I think you should be punished, and punished financially. So, you took the money that you had, you refused to multiply it by a good, smart bet on the future. And I think that there should be consequences for that.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all. Last question for you. You've been incredible, kind with your time here. If you were the president over the next 6 months, what's your playbook? So President Chamath's got full control, can do whatever was within the presidential powers. What's your playbook to kind of weather the storm and get us out of this?
I would first stand up every single voting site that we would use in the November election. And I would schedule every single man, woman, and child to come through all of those testing facilities. And I would basically deploy a rapid test to figure out whether they had coronavirus in that moment. Okay. And families could come, 10 minutes apart so that you could get back into your car and go, et cetera, et cetera. In step number one, if you didn't, so that we can start to restart this economy. And then longer term is an infrastructure bill that basically resets incentives towards resiliency, towards inefficiency, away from efficiency.
I think that's a pretty solid plan. I'm actually shocked that some of this hasn't been instituted already. The lack of testing just blows my mind. I mean, the stats I saw on Saturday, 895,000 people, I think, have been tested out of 330 million in the United States.
I think the other reckoning that we have to do, maybe just to finish on this, is that we've politicized things that should never have been politicized. Health should not be politicized. The problem is that starting with Obamacare, health became something that was about the Democrats versus the Republicans. And you can see how that's sort of like, flowed into things like the FDA and the CDC. And history will tell what they could have done better. History will tell what the WHO should have done differently. But I think what we can see is that there are many points along the evolution of this disease where logic and open-mindedness and iteration ran into bureaucracy, and bureaucracy won. And I think that's probably the most generous way of describing it. And we need to figure out where there are almost constitutional level provisions You have the right to bear arms. Great. What about the right to basically not die in a preventable scenario? What does that mean for how these organizations should run? We at a very basic level have told the healthcare infrastructure that we must do no harm. And I think it's time to say, look, with 8 billion people in the world and a $90 trillion economy that supports those 8 billion people, do no harm doesn't work anymore. It doesn't scale. We need to do our best. And there's a lot of rules that could change in a scenario where you embrace do your best. And I think that has to happen. But the failures of the political infrastructure and the healthcare infrastructure to use bureaucracy as the thing that drives decision making, I think, is also a domino that has to fall after this, and we need to revisit, because it's we've done a lot of unnecessary damage to ourselves, and some of these self-inflicted injuries we should figure out how to prevent for the next time, because it's going to come again.
Yeah, I think we are living in incredibly uncertain and chaotic times. One, just thank you for your time today. But two is, I think I speak for a lot of people in that we'd love to see you go public and kind of be along for the journey. So.
Doubtful. No, I just want an ordinary, everyday story about electric vehicles and renewable energy. Just something run-of-the-mill, nothing special or clever. Okay, so here we go. The oil giant Shell wants us to stop buying petrol and diesel cars. What the what? Now, it's been quite widely reported that Shell is pushing the UK government to bring the ban on the sale of new fossil fuel vehicles from 2035 to 2030. Bring it 5 years earlier. So in 10 years from now, you can't buy a petrol or diesel car in the UK. This isn't Greenpeace or Extinction Rebellion saying this. This is Shell. One of the oldest and biggest oil companies on earth, are stating publicly that we should convert our entire transport fleet to electricity. So let me delve into the box of the accompanying box of caveats at the moment.
Just one quick thing to pay attention to. Watch the body language of Becky as these questions and answers are sort of going back and forth. Just watch things play out over the course of the very short clip.
What about the two big oil companies, Exxon and Chevron, today? Both of them drags on the Dow right now.
Now, I could be hallucinating here, but it does appear to me, maybe, possibly, there's an emotional reaction here. She looks a little bit sad. Is it possible that perhaps she owns some of these stocks that are not doing so well currently? Maybe, just maybe. I have no evidence. Let's just see how things play out. It's possible.
I know that Mike won't want to hear this, but I'm done with fossil fuels. They're done. Yeah, they're just done.
Because of...
This is absolutely huge from Kramer. He has said fossil fuels are done, and he said he's done with fossil fuels. If we unpack this, the implication here is that he is no longer interested in these as an asset. Done. And as a consumer. Done. And as an overall industry, it is done. This matters so much because everybody already knows this. At least the people with a brain in their head know this already. But to come out of the closet, so to speak, on television now and to tell everybody what those people behind closed doors already know, that we're getting off fossil fuels, it's just happening, is really important. And Jim is probably going to cop a lot of hate from a lot of friends. He's acknowledged this earlier before he started speaking because he knows he's got a lot of people that are making a lot of money out of big oil, and, well, the party's over, ladies and gentlemen.
We're starting to see divestment all over the world. We're starting to see the companies just regard them as, big pension funds saying, listen, we're not going to own them anymore.
One, this is true, and two, this matters. Big funds getting out of the stock means that other smaller investors might get out of stocks too, because if they're concerned about the future prospects and they decide to leave the stock because the big funds are leaving, then you can have this domino effect. And the ripples from this one comment on television can actually spread right throughout the market. Who knows if this will be the case? But Cramer has now said something that's going to cause that domino effect. I'm not saying that it's going to be the only catalyst, but it's part of a conversation that's going to change very quickly. Because who wants to be associated with f***ing up the planet? Who?
Fine. Now, to be specific, this article was published on LinkedIn by Sinead Lynch, who's the UK country chair of Shell. And she's suggesting that we need to plan a transition to move from fossils to electrons. We need to see a huge increase in the availability of public charging and continued support for drivers to transition from fossils to electric. And to be fair, Shell are involved in doing this. So there are now numerous Shell filling stations, gas stations, petrol stations, call them what you will, that have rapid chargers, and they're installing a lot more. Now, I recently visited a development of a major, and I do mean a major, charging hub that we're filming an episode about. I don't want to tell you anything about it yet. It's still under wraps. It's not finished yet. But believe me, it is amazing. It is game-changing. It is awesome. It is incredible what they're doing. So that's an episode that will come later on this year. And another story about car charging. Now, this is just from Bloomberg New Energy Finance. They like to keep their eye on things like this. The number of public charge points around the world has clicked above the 1 million mark. The important bit is that the number of chargers around the world has doubled in the last 3 years. So from none in like 2006, no, let's go 1999, kind of basically none, to however many, 500,000 in 2017, and now there's 1 million. So it's, I think if you did that graphy thing, it would be flat, going up, and then boom, it would be pretty impressive. Most of this new infrastructure, of course, guess where it is? It's in China. The second most common place is in Europe, and really lagging behind somewhat is the United States of America. China just remains the most aggressive on jump-starting its electric vehicle economy. So more than half the world's charge points, now over half the world's solar panels are all installed in China, which is where they make them. So, you know, there's a lot of debate going on about that whole thing. The European Union recently announced a goal of 1 million public chargers in Europe by 2025. Now, even General Motors in America has finally decided to invest in public charging stations in the USA, a mere 24 years after they introduced their first electric cars. Those legacy automakers, you know, they are so quick off the mark, aren't they? Make a decision, boom, 24 years later, actually do something.
The energy system is undergoing the most profound shift since human agriculture. We are shifting to much more efficient use of energy, renewable supply, distributed rather than centralized systems. And this is going much faster than the incumbent energy suppliers can understand or adapt to. So, for example, almost 2/3 of the net additions of electric generating capacity in the world in the past 2 years have been renewable because they work better and cost less than new or even existing conventional power stations. The efficiency of using energy has increased radically, and now we've just discovered how to make the savings even several-fold bigger and cheaper, often with increasing returns. So the more savings you buy, the cheaper they get, so you buy more so they get cheaper, just like renewable energy. The climate models, the models of climate change, climate science, conservatively understated the speed and the runaway potential of climate change. But equally, the models of climate policy understated what we can do about this problem. So offsetting those two biases, the race of our lives is very much on, and neither despair nor complacency is warranted. In fact, the past 3 years, the sum of energy savings and carbon-free energy supply growth has been just the amount that we would need for the minimum Paris Agreement goal of only 2 degrees global warming, although we need to go twice as fast and get to the much safer 1.5 degrees or even less.
We cannot defend freedom abroad by deserting it at home. Good night and good luck.
So Amory B. Levins, a consultant physicist and innovator in energy and its links with resources, security, development, and environment, has advised the energy and other industries for 4 decades, as well as the United States Department of Energy and the Department of Defense. His work in 50-plus countries has been recognized by the Alternative Nobel, Blue Planet, Volvo, Zayad, Onassis, Nissan, Shingo, and Mitchell Prizes, MacArthur and Ashoka Fellowships, the Benjamin Franklin and Happold Medals, 12 honorary doctorates, and the Heinz Lindbergh Time, Hero for the Planet, National Design, and World Technology Awards. A Harvard and Oxford dropout, former Oxford Don, honorary architect, and Swedish engineering academician, he's briefed 23 heads of state, written 31 books, and over 490 papers. Co-founder and chairman emeritus of Rocky Mountain Institute, an independent nonprofit think and do tank that drives the efficient and restorative use of resources. His work as its chief scientist has lately included leading super efficient redesigns of numerous buildings, several vehicles, and over $30 billion worth of industrial facilities in 29 sectors. He led the creation of 2 of RMI's for-profit spin-offs, eSource and FiberForge, which he chaired until 2007. His latest books with various co-authors include Natural Capitalism, Small is Profitable, Winning the Oil Endgame, The Essential Amory Levins, and Reinventing Fire. The most recent of his visiting posts at 10 universities was as the 2007 Map Ming Professor at Stanford University's School of Engineering, and he's currently the Professor of Practice at the Naval Postgraduate School. He's a member of the advisory board to the Chief of Naval Operations and of the National Petroleum Council. In 2009, Time named him one of the world's 100 most influential people. In foreign policy, named him one of the 100 top global thinkers. Hopefully someday we'll be soon enough to have a president name him Secretary of Energy. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Amory Levins.
Thanks. Well, thank you very much. After that generous introduction, I can't wait to hear what I'm going to say.
So we have a question pertinent to a lot of people in the audience here. What advice would you offer to engineering or business students looking to start a career leading sustainable energy into the future?
Well, learn about as many disparate and seemingly unrelated things as possible. We have too many narrow specialists. That's why we're in the mess we're in. So I would urge you to learn a lot of biology and social science, cultural anthropology. You know, any cultural anthropologist would have a field day looking at tribalism in the energy business, or businesses. I've taught now at 10 universities, but I've only taught subjects I've never studied. It's a lot more fun that way because I could have beginner's mind. My background might be atypical, but I had a long track in physical science, but a parallel track that went chronologically, music, classics, math, linguistics, some law, a little medicine, a lot of mountain photography. And I then started to diversify, because in our line of work you need to pick up a couple of new disciplines a year, and you never know what they're going to be. Maybe this year it's naval architecture and aerospace, and maybe next year it's refinery engineering and mining engineering. But after 20 or 30 years of that, everything reminds you of something. So I would urge you, while getting the fundamentals down, to jump the fences, walk on the grass. I'll let you in on a secret in case you haven't figured it out yet. I was lucky enough to figure this out early. There are few, if any, disciplines that a smart and motivated person cannot learn as much about in 6 months as most, not all, but most people in the field know. Once you realize that, you can be completely uninhibited in romping around in everybody else's turf and learning whatever you want and need to learn. And then you can be really effective.
Thank you. We had a few questions about the Keystone XL pipeline. I think I know your answer to that one. So we'll skip that. And
but actually, you may not know my answer to it, which is that if, I don't know what the president will decide, but if he decides not to allow it, it will probably save investors from considerable losses on what's already a big bubble. There's a terrific report out from Carbon Tracker, which is a group of hydrocarbon industry financial analysts and deal makers, and they have analyzed the economics of the tar sands business, in which I have also worked, and they show it is the costliest thing on the global supply curve for liquid hydrocarbons. It is therefore extremely vulnerable to any dip in oil price or any increase in cost, including cost of capital or cost of transport. And it's just a very fragile business. It's a bubble. And I wouldn't want to have my money in it, even if I didn't care about its other implications.
well, it's been extremely enlightening. Everybody help me thank Emery Levin.
Thank you.
It's a god-awful small affair to the girl with the mousy hair, but her mummy is yelling no, and her daddy has told her to go, but her friend is nowhere to be seen. Now she walks through her sunken dream to the seat with the clearest view, and she's hooked to the silver screen. But the film is a sad thing for she's lived it 10 times or more. She could spit in the eyes of fools if they ask her to focus on sailors fighting in the dance hall. Oh man, look at those cavemen go. It's the freakiest show. Take a look at the low man beating up the wrong guy. Oh man, wonder if you'll ever know who's in the best-selling show. Is their life on Mars? It's on America's tortured brow that Mickey Mouse has grown up a cow. And now the workers have struck for fame, 'cause Lennon's on sale again. See the mice in their million hordes, from Ibiza to the Norfolk Broads. Rule Britannia is out of bounds, to my mother, my dog and clowns. But the film is a sad thing for, 'cause I wrote it 10 times or more. It's about to be writ again, as I ask you to focus on sailors fighting in the dance hall. Oh man, look at those kids. life on.